first, I want to talk to you, Cale, about a new Pew study that has come out. The title of the study is Modest Declines in Positive Views of Socialism and Capitalism in the US.
Yeah, a bit of a
So,
mixed
uh, you know,
bag.
a little bit of a mixed bag. And I should point out that Pew runs this study every few years where they poll people on their feelings about socialism and capitalism. And I do want to mention, for those of you who have been watching the show for a while, you might remember that I've done a segment in the past where I kind of look at some of these studies and I have some thoughts on what we should take away from them. But maybe I'll open it up to you first, Cale. We passed the study around. What'd you think of it? What was interesting? What stood out to you?
Right. Well, so the big headline is the fact that the positive rating for capitalism dipped from 65%. 65% of people say they have a positive opinion, down to 57. Whereas for socialism, it went from 42% as the higher mark in May 2019, down to 36% just last month. So there, in some ways, it's just objectively like not great news, but at the same time, I think it's worth just trying to understand, like, what does that even mean? Like, what do
Yeah.
people mean when they say they support capitalism versus when they say they support socialism? Because if you ask like one of us or one of our guests or people who just do politics for a living, where we have a very like specific definition, even if it's expansive, but it's like we're talking about very specific things, and it's usually has to do with like social structures, has to do with like the organization of the economy and like how wealth is distributed, how wealth is created, things like that. Whereas like the way that these people are defining it in this poll, it seems it's not in those terms, right? So that it's basically, and I'm paraphrasing basically, but that capitalism is basically equal to the freedom of choice of freedom of individuals to be able to do pursue things, an opportunity, things like that. Whereas socialism is roughly understood in the sense of like security, that it's a society that provides basic needs for you. And so with that being said, I do think there's some of like the interesting facts about the study are kind of in how that like how those perceptions have changed over time. And part of it is that basically Republicans are not really contributing at all to this change, that most of the actual change in an approach to do you support capitalism or socialism is actually among liberals and Democrats, and to some extent independents. Republicans are just kind of locked in; they're fine with their choices, I guess. That they hate socialism, they think
Right.
capitalism is
Yeah.
great. And broadly, I mean, again, it's always interesting because it's not monolithic, but it is something that's happening within, let's say, basically the Democratic Party.
Right.
That there's which is an interesting phenomena insofar as, like, given the context of the last 3 years, given the fact that in that time there's been the Build Back Better fight, there's been the pandemic and COVID, and there's also been the second Bernie Sanders campaign.
Right.
I do think one way to understand this, and look, if you disagree, that's fine, but my understanding of this is less about people rejecting needing material security, like rejecting wanting healthcare, because when you actually do surveys on the issues, the top issues for everyone is like economic security,
Right.
healthcare, wage increases, things like that. Like that's always the priority for most people, of what would make their lives better. So I think it's not that they're rejecting that; they're not rejecting like those things that would satisfy their material interests. It's actually they are rejecting kind of the optimistic, like we could have a better world. There could be
Right.
a society where we actually take care of each other. And
Yeah.
they've witnessed through the last few years, oh, when we wish for that, when we want that, when we fight for that, even when we organize for that, we get stomped on, we
Right.
lose.
Right.
And like, even though a lot of people will get back up and keep fighting, it sucks to lose. So that's my take, and maybe I'm like kind of
Well, I
spinning.
okay. So I have two things. I have two things to add to that. The first one, which you sort of touched on, and I think this came up when I, did my segment last year or whatever. And this is something that Pew actually addressed head on when they conducted this same survey in 2019. Is that I mean, as you pointed out, nobody really has the same definition of socialism or capitalism. Not just that we have, but like if you ask 10 people to define socialism or 10 people to define capitalism, you would get 10 different answers each time, right? So, that I think is probably the main reason why, like, all things considered, we should sort of take these surveys with like a little grain of salt. Right. But that said, I also want to mention that something that stood out to me in this in this report is, again, when you're looking at people who identify as Democrats, the age group of like 18 to 29-year-olds is, surprise, surprise, the age group that favors socialism like way more than they favor capitalism. I think the split is something like 60% of Democrats in that age range say they approve of socialism, compared to like 30% of people in that age range who say they approve of capitalism. I want to stay on this topic for a second, because I don't think it's just that they're young and idealistic. I think that there are a couple of interesting things going on here. One is that none of these people were alive during the Cold War, right? So like they got to miss out, or they got to bypass kind of a very intense period of anti-communist and anti-socialist propaganda. And the Cold War, I mean, obviously the right still tries to foment like accusations of socialism and tries to do a little Red Scare now and again. But I just think that it's mostly defanged, quite honestly. So there's that. And the second thing is like, this is a cohort that hasn't really been alive to see anything other than neoliberalism in total decay, right? So like, I think there's some statistic that Gen X is the last generation for whom a college degree like actually paid off. Since then, it's just been like mountains of student debt. Wages and productivity obviously have been sort of separated for decades, but have really intensified post Great Recession. So I don't think that those are insignificant factors, despite all of the confusion around what is actually socialism or what is actually capitalism. Like, it seems to make a lot of sense to me that this particular age cohort would be more amenable to socialism. But it's not my age cohort, it's yours. So what are your thoughts?
Again, I think that's disputable, actually. It depends on how they measure these things. But Gen Z socialism, also known as socialism. What you're touching on is the fact that, and it has to do with like the kind of the generational differences here too, that when they do this survey, like, again, these are like very ideological terms. Like, these are like not concrete things that they're contrasting. But, and you can kind of factor this into the survey, but in a broader sense, of course, like, people actually today live in capitalism. And when you actually ask them about like their living conditions, their standard, like what they expect in life, where like they're going, like, are they making ends meet? Do they have time to do what they want to do and spend time with people they love and care about and pursue interests? Most people basically say like, no, like, this is like, I'm getting a raw deal. Like, this is clearly not like working for me. But like, I can only imagine us getting worse, because that's how the last few decades have been. Like, things just keep getting worse. So there is this kind of like almost kind of backwards looking, like trying to look out for yourself, safety first kind of approach to these things. But again, obviously, like, socialism doesn't exist, and like, at least like, what if you want to get like really fucking, that little commune over there, and whatever. The point is that like, basically it doesn't exist, and it's not something that people can actually contrast. It's the same thing with like healthcare, that like they're contrasting when you ask like, do you support Medicare for all? It's like they're contrasting the actual healthcare system they're in versus like the idea of a better one. And people are rightfully cynical that like anything good could ever happen, because nothing good ever does happen. And that's why it's so vital to have political campaigns and political organizers that actually try to say, no, you do deserve better, and we can actually win these things, and there is a path to getting there. And that when you see a win, for instance, when like a union goes out and strikes and succeeds in getting their demands, that builds up momentum for other workers elsewhere to say, oh, wow, actually, maybe winning is possible. It's extremely difficult, but it's at least like it's something that could happen. And so I do think with all of this, like the survey, you know, it doesn't really change any of where we are in any real sense. Like that we still have the same issues and people will still respond to left politics if it's like primarily about, you know, dealing with their everyday issues and like amassing greater worker power or amassing greater democratic power in their lives. Like I still think there's probably hope for that, but
yeah,
I don't know. I work at a socialist magazine, so whatever.
Yeah. What do you know?
Yeah. But I don't know. So, you know, thanks, Pew.
It's an interesting report as always. Like I said, you know, even if you sort of take it with a grain of salt, it's sort of fun to look at the different breakdowns and everything. So that's out from Pew Research. Go check that out. And on that note, we love you. If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.